You guys are free to go. You're free to ask questions. Again, just a reminder, we've got opening social tonight at 6 at Little Valley Park, and there's going to be food and games there, so I invite you to come. And then the opening social is at 8 a.m. in the morning. And if you've got any other questions about the conference, you can come find me and ask. So we'll turn it over to Jason. Thanks.
Howdy, everyone. So to start off with, Trent hit me up about 4 days ago to stand in. So ideally, what I'd like to do is I'm going to bring up a few of the topics that I've found over my career that have been highly valuable and important, especially for municipalities. But I kind of want to run it more like an open forum, so feel free to interrupt, to ask questions, and kind of open it up to more of a discussion. By way of background, I won't go too deep, but I started trail design and trail building back in 2013. I was an apprentice. I mentored under a guy by the name of Jake Karsten. Jake was one of the founders of the IMBA Trail School and literally wrote the book that just came out for IMBA's Trail Guide that just came out. As Trent mentioned, I drove the Valley Vista Trail Project. I was a founding member of Utah Valley Trail Alliance. I worked for a couple of years as starting the trail advocacy program for the Utah High School Cycling League, and have done dozens of projects since then, with many with things like the Forest Service, helping them with NEPA surveys, and with the National Parks RTCA program. So I've been working on trails since 2013, and it's a passion of mine. Outdoor rec in general I love. In fact, in 2020, I was let go from my software job and decided to go back to school, and just graduated in December with a degree in recreation management. So if any of your municipalities are looking for people to come work for you, come talk to me. But let's start off for a minute, and I want to just talk about, there's going to be 3 topics that I'm going to kind of run through, but again, feel free to interrupt me, feel free to ask questions. I want to talk a lot about the importance of the role of the land manager and the landowner, and where that role should be and how you should establish yourselves as you move into the trail building process. Secondly, I want to talk about the importance of building good partnerships. Partnerships are super valuable, not just the partnerships to help you build your trails, but the partnerships with the other trail systems and other land managers that are around you. And then finally, given the time, if we have time, I'd like to go through the 8 steps of the trail building process as laid out in the guidelines to successfully managing the process, the new book from IMBA. And we can kind of talk about those. By show of hands, how many of you either have trail systems currently or are looking to build trail systems in your municipality? So good number. That's probably why you're here. That makes a lot of sense. Let's talk then, to start off with, any questions about me, about anything about my background before I move on? Okay, cool. Let's talk for a minute then about the role of the land manager and the landowner. And this is one that I've seen over my career that I think is super important. You're going to have a lot of players in the trail building process. You're going to have financiers, you're going to have backers, you're going to have user groups, you're going to have not-for-profits, and you're going to have environmental groups. You're going to have all of these different players that are very interested in what you're doing and what you're working on. And in my opinion, the role of the land manager and the landowner is paramount. You should establish yourself as the alpha decision maker and the final call on any decisions that get made around that trail system. And it's really easy to let those waters get muddied. It's really easy when people come in to have them feel like, because they're super passionate about it, because they're throwing money at it, that they have a say and that they should be able to make the final decision. And they definitely should have a say. If you don't have your user groups, if you don't have the passion of those user groups, your projects don't go very far. If you don't have donors and grant providers and healthy partners, you're not going to have any fuel in the tank to go anywhere. So all of those roles are very important, but as the land manager, the ultimate position that you hold is whatever happens on that property is permanent, right? And so everyone who has a stake in that, everyone who has an interest in that, the changes that you make, the decisions that you put into your master plans, the way that you develop your trail systems, those are permanent decisions. Money may come and go as hard as it is. Users may change in terms of what's popular. Even today, we see this revolution with our e-bikes and other things. Things change in what's popular and what's happening and where the passionate nature of your user groups come from. But the land that you have stewardship over, that's going to stay. And so whatever you plan to do with it, ultimately it's your stewardship, it's your decision, and you need to establish yourself in the process of being in that position. Making sure that you're careful about change orders, make sure that you're careful about corridors, that you're careful about the plans and the designs that you come up with. So, and bearing that in mind, while all these other players are critically important, you really are the one that's going to leave the legacy behind. And I've seen trail projects go fantastic, and I've seen them go south really, really quickly, just because a land manager or landowner doesn't fill in the role that they need to fill in and doesn't take that kind of responsibility that they need to take. So let me open that up to you guys. Have you guys seen anything like that in your experience? Is there something like that that you have questions about? You guys have been sitting staring at people talking at you all day, haven't you? Yeah, I can feel that one. No, good. All right. Well, so that was the first topic I wanted to bring up, was just talking about your role as a land manager, which leads into our second topic, which is partnerships. Building trail systems in a silo is fraught with problems. If you think that your municipality, if the property that you're building on is sort of isolated and you're going to build your own thing, you're setting yourself up for real problems, because all of our properties, all of the land that we build trails on, are ultimately going to have connectivity issues. Hikers, bikers, equestrians, motorized, I don't care what it is, people are going to try and get access, and they're going to try and build access from other trail systems that they're on, from parking lots that are convenient. If we're not working with the partners around us, first of all, the other land managers and other landowners around us, we're setting ourselves up for a world of hurt. If you're thinking you're going to build in a silo and that your gates and your entry points to your trail system are going to be the only one that people are going to use without consulting the other property managers around you, you're going to be sorely in a painful position. Primarily, I like to talk a little bit about federal land managers to start off with. I've worked with the National Park Service, I've worked with the BLM, I've worked with the Forest Service, and I've worked with many partners when it comes to federal land management. And I know that for the most part, especially when I worked with Dion Giles in Pleasant Grove, we were quite concerned about how our property that we were working on butted up against Forest Service property that was actually wilderness designated. And that caused, we thought that was going to be quite a huge problem, especially we're kind of a little reticent to go and approach the Forest Service, because we were feeling like, man, if we get into that weeds, it's going to be years down the road before we can get anything figured out. And it's true, federal land managers the process takes time. It does take a lot of time, but my experience has been that they have plenty of processes in place. Anybody familiar with the IVUMC, the Interagency Visitor Use Management Coalition? Okay, so the IVUMC is a program that's been developed at the federal government level to assist federal agencies in working with other federal agencies or with civilian partners. It's a whole framework that helps them to work with you to develop common signage, common rules and regulations, connectivity between your systems, that kind of a thing. If you haven't looked into that and your land comes up close to federal land in any way, shape, or form, I would highly recommend that you go take a look at that. And then reach out to the recreation planner or the recreation specialist for the agency that's nearest to you. Secondly, when it comes to partners, I like to talk a little bit about state, county, and what I call pseudo-government. So We've got our state lands, you're very familiar with those, I'm sure, your county lands. Pseudo-government, I talk about pseudo-government, they can tend to be things like utility organizations. They can tend to be things like, when I was working with Pleasant Grove, we worked with Metro Water Users of Salt Lake and Sandy. They own an aqueduct that runs through at the foothill level there. Working with these partners tends to be a little bit easier than working with federal partners in the sense that they have a little more leeway and a little less red tape to go through to assist you. However, when you get into working with things like the DNR, you have to be very respectful for the designations that they have for properties. It's a bit difficult to work with. With the Utah Valley Trail Alliance, we definitely spent a good deal of time working with them on that area that's just up above on the bench between kind of the base of Provo Canyon. I helped with the Timpanogos Bike Park that's on one side of that. We were working on the trail systems that run on Dry Canyon on the other side of that. They have a wilderness designated area. And to begin with, when we were working with them, they were very, very kind of reticent. They're like, we have all these trails that are going through there that are not designated trails. They're bothering the wintering deer population and things. So we had to sit down with them and find some common ground. Now, when it comes to building these partnerships, what's the benefit to you aside from connectivity and aside from getting your trails to line up? What I have found is that as you start to build partnerships around you, you can start to reduce things like competition for resources and grants, which is massive. If you have 6 municipalities with trail systems that all connect to each other and you're all vying for the same grants and you're all vying for the same volunteer force and you're all vying for the same resources, that's a competition that's kind of difficult to deal with. If you build a partnership together and you say, okay, we're going to look at this as an entire block of trail systems together and prioritize what needs to get done to be mutually beneficial to all of us, these kinds of partnerships can help strengthen what you can get done. They can help pool the resources that you have, the equipment that you have, the volunteers that you have, into a single entity, which gives you a lot more power, matching grant power, gets you a lot more power dealing with sponsors, gets you a lot more power in dealing without burning out your volunteer organizations. I have helped quite a bit down here in Washington County with Washington County and with the Forest Service and BLM down here, helping them to sort of build a maintenance coalition that they're working with the RTCA group right now on, where they can pool all those resources rather than compete for them. So one of the things that I would totally advise you guys looking into is who else has trails around me? Who else has trails that my users are going to connect with, and how can I build healthy partnerships with them to help support each other rather than try and I take care of it from here on the property line over and they take care of it from there on the property line over. Any questions on that? I'm just sort of spouting off and you guys are just kind of staring at me blank-faced here. So, all right, let me ask. For you guys that do have trail systems or are looking to build trail systems, do you have neighbors that have trail systems already? Neighboring municipalities or federal agencies? Raise a hand. Okay. How many have federal agencies, federal land you bump up against? Nobody? Nobody. Okay, interesting, given that most of the state's federal land. All right, so other municipalities? Raise a hand. You got other municipalities? And then what about private landowners / pseudo government agencies, those kinds of things? Yeah, so we've got these groups that have these things going on, and I think we often as land managers take this approach of, well, I'm going to build my thing, and then we'll make my thing work, and then we'll see how it comes together. If I could, I would just really highly counsel you to reach out, especially as you continue to build, even before you start building, if you haven't started yet, and start building those partnerships. It's going to really change the landscape of how you look at what you're building, how you look at the users that are going to be coming in and out, where they're going to be coming in and out from, and how you address things like directionality, user conflict, those kinds of things. I've seen trail systems where heavy equestrian use trails join right into mountain bike trails with soft berms, and because there's been no discussion about it, well, what ends up happening? We get our heavy equestrians coming through in the spring, post-holing all the way through the mountain bike trail system. And we get mountain bikers running right up on the equestrians, which they don't like. Now we've just generated this huge amount of user conflict that with some pre-planning could have been avoided. So with that in mind, questions about partnerships, about different organizations working with different groups? Anybody having partnership problems, conflict with other land managers around you? Nothing. No, I'm getting nothing out of this group. All right, no worries. All right, well, let's move on. We'll move on to the last one, which is I'm going to talk a little bit about the 8 steps of the development process. Now, I'm pulling this just so I've fully credited. IMBA came out with this book just at the end of last year. This book is called it's called Mountain Bike Trail Development Guidelines for Successfully Managing the Process. It is written for mountain bike trails, but honestly, the principles in it are for probably any soft surface trail you want to build. It's not mountain bike specific in terms of that. The process that you want to go through as you go through it, the way you want to think about things. I'm going to lightly touch on the steps, but I don't get any kickbacks, but I would plug this book to just about any land manager who's looking to put things in. It's going to really be helpful for you to sit down and be able to look through this process and look at the order of events and the way that you should approach that kind of order of events within it. So as I mentioned earlier, I got this book primarily because the guy who taught me trail building wrote it for IMBA after he helped them establish the trail school decade ago with IMBA. So and honestly, IMBA I think has some of the best ideas and principles in terms of soft surface trail building. I know that my time working with the Forest Service, they've even adopted many of the IMBA principles up and over what they already have in their trail building guides. Let's talk about that just a little bit, and I'm going to start off the first step, the first step of the process is just assessing the need, right? Many of you, obviously, you're parks and recreation folks. You're very familiar with doing needs assessments and understanding what we're talking about in terms of what the need is from the user groups that are be coming in. Trail systems are no different in terms of programming. When you determine what you're going to build for a trail system, you really need to understand what kind of programming you're going to have going on that trail system so that you can build it appropriately for that. So your assessment process is going to start off by looking at who are the user groups that are clamoring, what are the trends that are coming in that we can see around us that we're trying to support for, and what does that mean in terms of how we want to design these trail systems. How many of you have NICA teams? Anybody familiar with that? With Utah High School Cycling League teams that want to ride on their trail systems with their mountain bikes? Yes. Okay, so NICA teams, programming and designing mountain bike trails where a team can show up and put 200 kids and 70 coaches on mountain bikes one night on your trail system is a very, very different design than if you're going to be saying, hey, I'm going to build some really wilderness-based trails that are going to be highly sustainable and have low traffic. Just the way you have to think about them, not just the amenities that allow for that kind of traffic, but what it's going to mean in terms of wear, tear, maintenance, emergency response, those kinds of things. So assessing the use, assessing the needs up front is part of a really critical part of the assessment process, and looking at it from a program assessment mindset is really, really important. I oftentimes will see people want to build trails and say, oh, we need to build trails, or oh, this is a great place to build trails, but they haven't really thought about who's going to be using those trails. When we think about that and we think, hey, if I put one wheels and motos on the same trail system that I've had traditionally hundreds of equestrian users on, you're starting to build these places where there could be conflict and safety issues. So understanding what you're building for and assessing that is very, very important. Secondly, in the assessment is obviously you're going to need to identify your properties, get your geospatial data, make sure that you understand what you're dealing with in terms of environmental issues in those kinds of properties that you're looking at. I see often, especially here in Utah, the idea of I want to cram 20 miles of trail into a 4-acre plot, and it becomes very, very challenging to create a good and safe trail system when you're trying to cram trails in a way that they don't fit into the property. When you look at IMBA principles, when you talk about sustainability principles, there's a lot in there about the average grade, about how you assess where your drainage is going to be, how close you put your trails together based on back slope. These kinds of things are things that you need to think about up front as you're assessing the property, not down the road after you've thrown flags in the dirt and you've got people out with shovels. If you don't think about these things and assess them up front, you're going to be building trail systems that are going to collapse in on themselves, and they're not going to run well. And then finally, sort of the output of the assess stage is to get a concept design, right? You get some sort of concept mapping. Typically for concept design for public meetings, I like to put everything into Google Earth for that. I like to work in GIS, but I find when I go to public meetings, when I'm doing presentations, having something that's familiar and I can sort of zoom in and easily show them where the property is digitally tends to make a lot of difference. So I kind of promote using Google Earth as the method for concept designs, even over paper. I mean, paper's great when you want to get in, you want to start getting to your builders and your engineers. Definitely you need that stuff. Your GIS is definitely, ArcGIS is very, very powerful, and you need it for that kind of stuff. But when you're talking about interfacing at public meetings, interfacing at planning commissions or city council meetings, being able to bring something up in Google Earth is so easy and so convenient. So, questions on the assess process? No? Okay, you guys know it all, we're good. At the end of the assess process, I always like to provide what I call a feasibility report. And that really is sort of me, when I get asked to help with a trail system, it's me sort of saying, based on what you've told me you want to put here, and comparing that to our concept design, this is how feasible and successful I think this project might be. Those feasibility reports kind of can go in and be, for me, I like to make them pretty detailed. I like to say, hey, you've mentioned of the 5 things that you need, one of them is access for adaptive cycles. And I may say, in order for that to be feasible, you've got to have a much wider grade, a much shallower camber. I don't think you're going to fit 10 miles into this property and make it welcome for adaptive cycles. You may need to cut that down to 7 so that we can spread these out, we can do this in a different way, and we can provide some options that way. So that feasibility report, when you are working with trail designers and trail builders, I would say ask them for that. Say, hey, here are the things that we need and that we've decided we need in this system, and this is about what we want to come in at. Can you provide a feasibility report that tells me how closely we can hit each of these objectives, or which of these objectives may need to drop off in order for us to meet the others? That will be very helpful for you to be able to determine the value of the system that you're building. It will help you to communicate to your cities, to your city leaders, the actual benefits that you may be providing to them with this as you present that concept design. So, all right, so let's talk a little bit about planning. In the book, one of the principles that they have on every phase is at the next phase, you go back and refine based on what you've learned from the previous phase. I think that makes a lot of sense to most of us. There are a few times I've worked with folks who have just run headlong into it, but mostly you want to pause between these phases and look back and say, always refer to your original goals and objectives, and say, based on our goals and objectives, have we moved the mark, or are we staying with the goals and objectives that we started with? What you will find is almost every trail system, the goal line will shift a little bit along the process. And you want to be constantly reviewing where it's shifted to, and if that makes sense, or if you need to bring it back into alignment with your original goals and objectives. As Sarah mentioned, trail building, soft surface trail building is a long process, and it's really easy for what you wanted to be here and to end up over here at the end if you're not constantly checking back in on those goals and objectives. Next up, you want to talk about planning your corridors. So as we begin into the trail building process, I'm a big believer in allowing the trail builders to do their art, and to do that, you need to give them a corridor to work within, right? I've worked with trail builders. I think some of the federal agencies I've worked with in the past, they've wanted to lay pin flags down and say, you trail builder, you follow these pin flags right where I put them. And my experience has been you are hobbling your trail builders, and you are minimizing the amount of enjoyability that you can build into these trails by doing that. If instead you say, hey, we're going to give you a corridor that's 30 feet off center, work within that corridor, but come back to me as the land manager if you need to go out of it, and we'll talk about a change order, right? Working and planning those corridors out up front, and understanding and getting the approval for that kind of a width of a corridor allows your trail builder, whoever it may be, to get in there and look at a thing and look at a piece of property and say, hey, we can build in these grade reversals. We can build in these rock features. Hey, if we just move 15 feet up here, we can have an A line and a B line. Or we can have a more direct approach to a point of interest for our hikers. We can pull our equestrians farther off the edge. Like, having that ability to work as they go along, invaluable. So I highly advise that you don't plan your trail system to be very specific and very tight and very small corridors to work in. Let your builders do what they do, and be as creative as they can be to make your trail system the best it can be. After you've got that planned out, you're going to create an index of your trails. Essentially, this is going to be your working document, right? This is going to be the index of the trails, roughly how long they're planned for, and that will help you figure out things for when you're getting ready to create your proposals, your pricing, and that kind of a thing, as well as a working log of which ones are getting completed in which order and how they're going. So you're going to create an index of those trails. Typically, we do it by numbering them. We figure out naming trails down the road. But a spreadsheet that creates that index is going to be very helpful for you as land managers to track the progress and be able to prioritize which ones you feel are higher priority than other ones. A good example of this, Valley Vista Trails, when we were building those in Pleasant Grove, we built Valley Vista Trails in a process that's called a stacking loop system. Anybody familiar with that term, stacking loop system? Okay, so a stacking loop system essentially is a system where the easier trails are closer to the trailhead, and you create a loop, and that loop, your first loop will be your easiest loop, and at the top of that loop will be two merging connections to the next most difficult loop, which will then merge into the next most difficult loop, and they get harder, progressively more difficult as you go. They stack. And the nice thing about a stacking loop system is if you have entry-level users, whether mountain bikers, hikers, whatever they may be, they can see pretty quickly, if I stay on the trail that's named whatever that trail name is, it will stay roughly about this difficult all the way around, and I can do that. When I get to the top, I can decide, oh, that was pretty easy. I think I could handle a little bit more. And then I can make a turn and get onto that next trail and say, oh, okay, yeah, this one was a little more tough. I think I'm ready to go down. I just stay on it, and then it works you back down to the bottom. So as we built these stacking trail systems, it made a lot of sense for us to sort of build from bottom up, because we were building a community trail system very close right off the Murdoch Canal, where we knew we were going to have families up there all the time. So we started with those lower trails first and started working our way up. In some cases, we may prioritize those farther up trails first. We don't want a lot of people out here yet until we get the system completed. So let's build the stuff that's really hard to get to, and then start working our way down, and then we can hold a grand opening when we get down to the bottom, right? Sometimes that is the way you want to prioritize. But you really want to think through with that trail index and use it to help you prioritize the order that you're going to build things in. And then, obviously, with planning, this is the time when you're gonna initiate your environmental reviews. This is where you're gonna start planning and working with your partners, with your other people that are around you, your other municipalities, and really getting a feel for what the process is gonna look like. Now, we haven't even gotten to where we're gonna start bringing in builders or talking about that yet. We're really starting to look at what this is going to look like, at which case you can start looking at pricing and start looking at what the cost analysis might look like, okay? Additionally, this is when we start thinking about maintenance. We don't start thinking about maintenance after the trail system's built and we start, and go, oh, well, now we got to maintain it, what are we going to do? You want to start thinking about maintenance way up front. In fact, my advice to most land managers is try and build your first year's maintenance budget into your build budget. Try and build that first year of maintenance into your build budget, because if you can do that, that will kick off your maintenance needs for that first year. You'll get a better idea of what it is, and you'll be prepared for year over year moving forward and how to roll that forward. Finally, out of the plan, you're going to create your concept plan. So we've got our approvals, we get our concept plan, we're kind of getting to the point where we're ready to go. So the next step, we move into design phase. This is where things can fluctuate a little bit depending on how you choose to go building. To begin with, you're obviously going to go refine, you're going to do your double check, make sure you're still in alignment with your original goals and objectives, and then you're going to start looking at clearing out your corridors. Now, you can say, hey, we're going to hire a builder. When we get to hiring the builder, we're going to let them clear the corridors. The municipalities that I've worked with have tended to want to clear their own corridors with their own crews first, and then bring the builders in and let the builders work from there. Pleasant Grove City and Orem City, they both wanted to have their own chainsaw crews, kind of clearing the wood, choosing which trees stay, which trees go, and kind of clearing those open corridors, getting them prepped. Now, whether you choose to do that or not with your own municipality is kind of up to you, but eventually you're going to want to get those corridors flagged, right? And flagged out so that your builders can see your center line and they know where they're working with their corridor. So you get your corridor flagging done. So next step is you have to think through your logistics planning. Where are your builders going to stage? How are they going to access the property? What kind of impact are they going to have on the surrounding areas as they're building? Those kind of logistic planning. What kind of equipment is going to be needed and used to be brought in? Then you update your concept plans and you add in an emergency response. Now, as I've built trail systems, often emergency response planning tends to go by the wayside. I highly recommend you bring that in up front. You are building trail systems that are going to have hikers and equestrians and mountain bikers and crazy kids doing crazy stuff, and eventually you're going to need to get emergency services into those trail systems. If you've thought through it in advance and you have good emergency access, that will minimize the impact to your trail system. One of the things I see a lot, anybody familiar with Bear Claw Poppy down here in St. George, Bear Claw Poppy system? I love Bear Claw Poppy, it's one of my favorite systems, but every time there's an accident out there, emergency services has to get out to that accident, and they tend to have to rip right across the cryptobiotic crust. They tend to have to go right down the trails, which kind of tear them up. It's kind of difficult to get access in there. And so if you're thinking up front, how am I going to get emergency access into my trail systems as you're designing them? Hey, where are the dirt roads that already cross there? Do I need to add in a few things that will allow emergency access in? You're going to save yourself a lot of trauma down the road as those events happen. I like to tell the story in Pleasant Grove. We actually had a wildfire that came in and was coming down and threatening the trail system. And because we had built in emergency access points, we actually allowed the fire crews to get in, get on the trail, use the trail as a fire break, and then stop the fire from coming down because we had pre-planned for that emergency access. And that it's one of my favorite stories to tell because the city at the time had been very, very concerned about what the impact of the trail was, and then almost overnight they turned around and said, when the fire chief came and said, this trail system just turned a 150-acre fire into a 2-acre fire because we could break it right here, and how much that had saved. So think about that. Think about your emergency access and the response plan there. And then once you're done with that, generate a cost estimate. Look at what the current market is saying for builders to come in, look at the kind of the principles that you're going to be using, and get an idea of what you think this is going to cost. Because you don't want to go into the bid phase without already having some sort of conceptual idea of what you're facing. Does that make sense? Okay, anything on design? Anybody bored of me talking? Because if you're bored of me talking, I can cut it off. Okay. All right, well, next up we're talking about contracting. Now, contracting is something that I don't know nearly enough about. I've done a lot. I've never acted in your shoes. I've had to advise a little bit on prepping RFPs, but I haven't done the actual signing of contracts and contracting. So you probably know more about that. Trails Utah probably knows a lot more about that than I do. And I'm going to kind of skim over that because I understand that there are a lot more people that have a lot more experience with that. What I will say about prepping for those requests for bids, and when you're looking at hiring a contractor, and I think I heard Trails Utah mention that when they were up here. Look at the Professional Trail Builders Association. Look at the experience of the people that you've had, that they have had, and where they have worked and what they have worked on. In particular, make sure that they've worked on similar soils and similar conditions as the terrain you're going to have them come into, because that varies a lot between builders. If you have a builder that is highly skilled at bringing in outside dirt and building features with it, and you want them to build on a rocky granite surface, you might need to double check with them and say, hey, how much, what's your experience like building on steep hillsides with rocky granite surfaces? Because that's where their equipment that they have and their experience that they have may, as good as they are, may not be in alignment with what you need to get done. So consider those kinds of things as you're looking at builders, what the property's like, what kind of impact. The other thing that I like to talk a little bit about, and this is outside of the book, are the methods to getting trail systems built. So those of you that have trail systems, how many of you hired professional builders? Anyone? How many used volunteers? Got some volunteers, okay. So there, and how many have used internal crews? Just right from your city staff. So there's a lot of ways to go about this, and I have found that some of the best ways are sometimes these creative hybrids. One phase of Valley Vista, we had we didn't have the budget to hire a full professional trail crew to come out and build it. So what we did is we hired a professional builder. We hired Jake Karsten. He came out. Then the city went out and hired about a dozen high school, college kids as seasonals, and Jake trained them, taught them how to build trails, and they built the first 5 miles of the trail system as sort of a hybrid. And I bring that up because think outside the box when you're looking at your budget. Professional trail builders, I'm 100% on board. If you've got the budget to bring in a pro, you will always, well, you will most of the time be very, very happy with what your results are being. But we don't always have that kind of budget, and to think outside the box. With Pleasant Grove City, what that did for them was they now had a dozen trained trail builders who came back year over year for the next several years and were able to help with maintenance and help to advise and help to guide on volunteer days and things like that. So it kind of built up a nice crew that was available to them there in Pleasant Grove City. All right, so let's jump over to build. The build process, some of the big things, the highlights here for the build process, make sure you've got a detailed schedule, okay? Sometimes I've worked with builders and I've worked with organizations where they're like, well, we're gonna get started and we'll see how it goes. And we're gonna start working and we'll see how it goes. Every time that's happened, I've seen it go really south really fast. Things don't get done quite right. They don't get done quite in time. We run into the winter seasons, and then a bunch of stuff that we did gets washed out because it wasn't finished before the snows came in. make sure that you've really thought through your detailed schedule. This is what we want to get completed. Work with your builder to see what they're capable and what they feel capable committing to, and work in a way that you can complete the project in little phases. The idea of going out and building one big trail and having it all come together just great is pretty challenging. But if you could build it and break it down into small pieces, hey, we're gonna have this first loop done in the next 3 months. Hey, we're gonna have the first 10 miles done by the end of the summer. Those kinds of things become very, very valuable. Not only are they valuable in terms of just preventing wasted time and effort, but they're valuable in terms of things like matching grants for the work that you've done. They're valuable in ways of drumming up sponsors and volunteers and things like that, because you're showing progress in small incremental steps rather than this thing that is half done and doesn't seem to ever get to the finish line. So try and find those ways to give those deliverables. Again, I'll kick back to Pleasant Grove. As we did this stacking loop system, and we could finish a loop and open a loop. Well, as we finished a loop and opened that loop and then moved on to the next loop, that started not only generating more momentum for the trail system, but it also started generating a lot of interest, and it started helping us with that sort of promotion of the trail system, right? And as many of you know, working in parks, you can build it, but if you don't promote it, it's going to sit there and be a waste for a long time. So, and that's step 6 is promoting. Make sure that you're thinking through how you're going to promote your system. Are you going to do that? What are your channels? Do you have social media channels to promote on? Do you want to promote to local user groups? Do you want to bring them into that promotion process? Are you going to brand your trail system? I love the bike park here. They have that great little snake logo. They have a way they've promoted this. It's fantastic. And I think how we promote our trail systems does a lot to drive the kind of traffic that we receive at those trail systems. So as you start thinking through, and as the build process is going, start planning for how you're going to promote this. Are you going to hold a grand opening, a grand kickoff opening day? Those are fantastic. Cities love to have those. City council members love to come out with their big scissors and say we've done an awesome thing. Are you going to do that? And if so, how are you going to promote? And in promotion, I like to include signage. Think about what your signage is going to look like, how your signage is going to direct and inform your user groups. If you haven't thought through signage in the plan process, you definitely should be thinking about it in the promote process. Because any trail system, and I'm going to say this point blank, if you're not putting signage up in your trail system, you're going to create user conflict, you're going to create problems, you're going to get people lost, you're going to have more emergency services problems. Signage is super important. And if you're working with partners, if you've partnered, whether it be with federal agencies, other municipalities, private groups, make sure that you're doing your very best to have your rules, your regulations, your language, and your signage as much in unison with those partners as you possibly can. Because what really tends to happen, I see it down here in St. George a lot, is hey, one user will be traveling on their e-bike across BLM land where it's just fine, and they won't even know that they've crossed into some other property where an e-bike isn't allowed, and now all of a sudden they're breaking rules and they don't even know it because they've crossed into this property. Signage hasn't been put up to inform, nothing has been done, they just assume it's all the same. And so if you haven't done that, if you're not thinking through that, you need to be thinking through that in terms of branding and signage. Make sure that you're publishing your content and your maps. If you have not reached out to some of the big app providers for your user groups in advance, you need to get on board with that. You need to get moving pretty fast. Trailforks, All Trails, all of these different apps, if you'll reach out to them, send them your maps, they're going to put them in there. That's going to help promote you. Additionally, a lot of these groups allow you to put in a place where people can go and donate to your trail system from those apps. Super great, easy way to get some free bucks when people want to. It also allows you to track a lot of usage. Now you have to look at it in terms of, well, what percentage of my users are using this app? If you're building a mountain bike trail system and you're using AllTrails or Strava, you might be thinking, okay, well, let's take a look at that and assume that X percent of my users are using this, and I can now see that they're logging 1,000 rides a week. So take that 1,000 rides, multiply it by the multiplier, and you can kind of get a feel for what kind of usage you're getting in your trail system and how it's being used and who it's being used by. And that's a great way to help promote it to the right channels. So if you haven't thought through that when you're promoting, make sure that you start reaching out to those groups and include into that not just the apps, but the user groups on the different social media platforms that you're providing services and programming for. Make sure that you're reaching out and providing your maps, providing your rules, providing your volunteer days and those kinds of things through those channels, promoting your system. And then along those same lines, make sure that you have built in a process for tracking and observing what's happening on your trail system. Most trail systems that I've worked on in the past have been kind of this fire and forget kind of thing. Well, we built it, we know people are using it, somebody reaches out when there's a problem, I'll go fix it if they reach out, but they're not really tracking what's happening on their trail system. And what you need is a real good idea of who your main users are, what those groups are like, what your use types are like, because as you move in to maintenance and refinement over the next 100 years of maintaining your trail system, if you understand how the trends are changing by the people using your trail system, you can be adapting them ahead of the game instead of trying to go back and fix things that have been tore up because you didn't think about that use type. An example that I'll give, and this is one of my failures that I had to learn from. With Valley Vista, we built this trail system, and when we built it primarily with mountain bikers in mind. Now, it was a multi-use trail system, and we knew that we would have some hikers and some day use and some things like that. And we built this system, but what we didn't consider was how much equestrian use was going up that way. And we didn't monitor it. And so all of a sudden, we go up there after several months, and there are post holes all through the trail system. And not just on the trail system, I understood that, but across the berms and across trail switchbacks and things like that. What we weren't doing was monitoring the use. And when we understood and reached out to the equestrian groups, they said, well, you built these trail systems, they make no sense for us to take our horses on these. And so we're cutting across them. What we found out was they wanted access to the Forest Service property up above. And by building them a straight shot trail that took them up there, they were thrilled and happy. Had we been monitoring the use early on, we would have seen that, we would have been able to adapt to it ahead of time and not had to do near as many repairs as we had to do over the first year. So make sure you're monitoring the use and seeing who's going up there and who's using it and how you can adapt them. That brings us into maintenance. As you move into maintenance, my advice with maintenance really is you've got to be thinking about when you decide the goals and objective of your trail system, that is going to sort of set the tone for what you need to plan for maintenance. A good example, a bike park like this is what I call a high maintenance trail system. You are constantly going to need to be rebuilding the hills, rebuilding the berms, rebuilding the jumps and the drops. As they wear, they need a lot of maintenance. And that's great. There's not, I think historically people have thought, oh, high maintenance means bad trail. No, that's not true. High maintenance just means a different kind of trail. And if you budget for that up front and you say, hey, I need to have built into my budget year over year the ability to go back and rebuild these 2 or 3 times a year, and it's going to cost me X amount of dollars, and you've already got that built in, you can continue to provide a fantastic trail system that has something very, very unique. I mean, look at all these kids having a blast out here, right? Without impacting things that you didn't foresee. Now, if you're looking to build a sustainable trail system that's going to last 100 years with very, very little maintenance, you plan for that up front. You say, hey, okay, we're building this sustainable trail system, and you design it in a way that you're going to avoid washes, or you're going to bridge things in ways that you're going to avoid as much erosion as possible, so that your maintenance budget is really, really low. So if you're thinking about maintenance when you're planning and setting your goals and objectives, and you understand the impact of the types of trails that you're building, you're already set up for success for your maintenance on the back end. Going back to Valley Vista, it's my easy one to talk about, because the whole process has happened there over 10 years, and we can kind of see what's happened. Valley Vista Trail System was built mostly with a high sustainability mindset, and typically Valley Vista needs one big volunteer day a year to take care of all of its needs. And because of the way we promoted Valley Vista, we do a big volunteer day the first Saturday in June every year. We promote it through all the social media channels. We promote it to the NICA athletes who use it. And we get between 150 and 200 volunteers out for 5 hours. And we can pretty much take care of almost all of the maintenance needs for that trail system for an entire year during that one volunteer day. So there's a big disparity in how you plan your trail systems and what you're planning for, and what their maintenance needs will be on the back end. Plan for those up front. You'll be successful with your maintenance on the back end as you go forward. And then the other thing with maintenance is make sure that you document everything. When you're doing maintenance, whether it's an emergency triage repair, it's your annual maintenance, it's your crew going out to check on things, document. Take pictures, write down what's happened, because you're going to use those year over year to isolate your problem areas that keep coming up each year, and being able to plan for or adjust and change them for future years. So you're going to be able to use those maintenance logs for trending, to understand what kind of problems you have, where those problems happen, and how you can mitigate those to actually reduce your maintenance budget in future years, if you're tracking. If you're not tracking, and if people are just running out and doing stuff willy-nilly, you're constantly going to be fighting an uphill battle, and you're not going to understand where your problem areas are. You're not going to be able to go back and fix those problem areas in a way that would reduce those problems. Which brings me to the final point, the 8th step, which is evolving your trail system. Now, when it comes to evolving a trail system, and I mentioned this earlier, you really need to be looking at how the trends of your communities are going. Just like you look at trending for pickleball or whatever else you're going to program for, your trends for your trail systems are going to evolve and change. One that we see a lot happening right now are these e-motos, these Saurons and these e-motos, right? We never planned for those. We never planned trail systems for them, but they're getting to be really, really popular. And we see them on the trail systems a lot, on the trail systems that are not designed for them. So now, if we watch that trending, we can be out ahead of that, and we can start evolving if we deem that the right approach for our municipality, and saying, hey, we have a trend here of these e-motos getting really, really popular. Maybe we need to provide a place that they can go that won't destroy what we currently have, or maybe we need to evolve what we currently have to be able to support that. As you look at those trends and evolve your system for them, you will be ahead of your citizens, ahead of your users, which means you're going to have a more positive experience from your users, rather than them constantly coming and complaining that they don't have what they want, and you trying to retroactively jump in when they're already upset. The second part of evolving your trail system is, as a trail system gets used heavily, there are times when you're going to have to reroute that trail system. So for those of you that have trail systems, how many of you have cupping problems? This is where your trail turns into cupping. Have you seen this? Yeah, cupping problems. Where are you at? Okay, so cupping problems typically come from heavy use. Is that where yours is coming from? Heavy use, yeah. So cupping problems are a big issue, right? Because water drainage, when they start cupping, the water isn't coming down and sheeting across the trail like it's supposed to. It's coming down, getting trapped on the trail, and starting to create rutting problems. Eventually, with cupping and heavy use, the most the most effective way to deal with that is to start thinking through evolving your trail system and rerouting your trail system. For a while, you can keep cutting down the slope, and you can keep cambering, and you can keep dropping, but eventually you're going to have to start thinking through, how do I evolve, how do I reroute? This is obviously, I look at cupping as a success marker, right? That means that people love your trail system, they're using your trail system, and that's fantastic, that's what we want. But eventually we have to start thinking through, how am I going to evolve this trail system? And so when you start noticing those cupping and you start doing the repairs for it, that's the moment to start thinking, a few years down the road, how might I reroute this? How might I evolve this trail system so that I can move off of that area, rehab that area a little bit, and maybe even 10 years down the road, move back. But you need to start thinking through that evolution of your trail system, because trail systems, especially heavy used trail systems, are going to need to evolve over time. You're going to start thinking through things like bridges and berms and rock features and how those start coming up. Anybody have rock gardens? Like just heavy boulder rock gardens in their systems? Rock gardens are an interesting thing to look at when we talk about evolving trail systems. When they get built, those rocks pushing up through, mountain bikers love them, hikers are fine with them, equestrians hate them. But as use happens, what happens is those rocks grow. They just start popping up out of the ground, right? The dirt around them erodes, they start getting bigger and harder and bigger and harder. Well, how do we evolve the trail system at that point? Are we going to bring dirt in? Are we going to try and bring dirt in, refill that in and let it do its same cycle again? Are we going to reroute? Are we going to bridge that? We need to think about that and how we're going to evolve that trail system. So we're not just evolving the trail system for different users, we're trying to evolve the trail system for sustainability, for fun, for enjoyment, those kinds of things. So those are the 8 basic steps at a super high level. I'd like to just kind of open it up. Does anybody have questions, thoughts, anything they can share with the group from their experiences? No? Everybody's ready for dinner. We're done. All right, well, that's all I have for today. Then, if nobody's got anything else, I'll leave you to it. I hope a little bit of what I shared with you is informative and helpful. And if you have any questions, I'll stick around for a little while. So, thank you.